All the materials provided in this interview are for informational, educational, or entertainment purposes only, and are not intended to be or serve as a substitute for professional, medical, or mental health advice, examination, diagnosis, or treatment. Welcome to Healing Doorways, a place to explore different subjects to expand our human consciousness. I am your host, Alicia Marcano. My guest today will be talking about a trauma therapy that you probably haven't heard before, TRTP, The Richards Trauma Process, which is a therapy that in very short amount of time, from around 3 sessions, it can heal effectively a traumatic experience. Catherine Marty is a trauma therapist, energy worker, sound healer, and an avid hiker. Using her experience as a trainer and facilitator in the mental health and family violence sector, she is passionate about helping others connect with healing and nature. I hope you find this interview helpful for yourself or someone you might know. Hi, Catherine. Welcome to Healing Doorways.
Hi,
thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm very excited because I haven't heard from what we're going to talk about today, the TRTP, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to ask if you can explain to people what is the TRTP stands for and what does it come from?
Yeah, it's an excellent question because it's actually quite a relatively new type of therapy. I would say it was created around 6 or 7 years ago. I might be a little bit wrong, but it is still very much in its infancy. I would say there's probably around maybe a few hundred practitioners who are trained at this point in time. So TRTP stands for the Richards Trauma Process. And the reason for the name is that was created by a woman in Queensland called Judith Richards, who was absolutely brilliant. And she actually went through extreme trauma herself and decided that she wanted to create a process to help herself and her family. And she looked at all the different types of therapy and the fact that talking therapy, whilst some modalities have had a lot of great success, often take a really long time and will have very different outcomes for different people. As we know, there's no therapeutic model that works for everyone. So what she did is she took sort of the best parts out of each one, and she has done an incredible amount of work to refine it down to a really simple, generally it's a 3-appointment process over a 3-week period. And through this process, we're able to essentially shake up our conscious core beliefs. So anything that we take on from even before we're born, and then when we're children, and then as we're growing up, and these unconscious core beliefs that sort of sit within ourselves and what make up who we are, essentially. And through this process, we're able to essentially shake these up. So say, for instance, with an unconscious core belief, someone might believe from a very young age, I'm not lovable or I'm unlovable. Mm-hmm. And so through this process, we're able to, and this can actually lead to self-sabotage throughout their lives. And so what we can actually do with this particular process and what we focus on in the first session is through picking up on these unconscious core beliefs, we actually are able to shake these up and then introduce the person to the truth of who they are, which is a really profound, it's a really amazing session, the first one. The second session is where we address, it's really where the rubber hits the road. So it's where we address the trauma. And what I really love about this process is that it doesn't re-traumatize the client. So the client's not having to go through all of their traumatic events over again in detail, which means that, and through this process, because we've already done that first session and we're giving the client, or essentially setting up the client to be in that empowered state. And through that process, we're able to go in there and actually use the imagination. And so the imagination will then link to the unconscious. and lots of other healing parts. The second session is quite big, but that's essentially the how it works. And then the third session is creating the future.
Wow.
So looking at what's going to be happening in the future, because often when people are in a traumatized state, or they may be suffering from different parts of the spectrum of PTSD, they may have depression, anxiety, all the different symptoms that we find that come from trauma itself. And often the future is not something that's really thought about. It's more the day-to-day getting through. So I guess what I could do is maybe talk a little bit about how trauma affects the brain, because then that sort of sets up as to why we find that TRTP is so effective. In that as human beings, when we do become stressed, we have a natural reaction. So it might be trauma response, it might be our bodies are structured to cope with stressful events. So what the body basically does and what the brain does is that certain parts will start to work more than others when we're in a stressed state. So if we need to, have you ever heard of fight, flight and freeze? Is a state that our minds and bodies go into if we're in any kind of danger. And so when we're in this state, we move into what we call hyperarousal. So we're going right up into the state where our whole body and our mind are going, we need to make this person safe. We need to make her safe. And that's where, at that point in time, we have different hormones such as cortisol and adrenaline that will just flood the brain. And they'll flood different parts of the brain. So basically our frontal cortex, so what's responsible for our thinking and decision making and so forth, that won't be working as much. We'll be working more on instinct. And what will happen is when the cortisol and adrenaline are being pumped through the brain, we'll find that the two areas that are responsible for making memory are not going to be working as well. So we've got the hippocampus and the amygdala. And so these little tiny parts that are sitting in our brain, all in that grey mushy bit in there, they are responsible for creating memories. And through that process, when they're flooded with all of these different hormones, they don't work as well, which means that when we are creating memories, and often when people are traumatized, when they're very, very stressed, it's not safe for them to make proper memories. And so what will happen is when we are traumatized, it means that the trauma will stay in the mind, the unconscious and the body. And it will continue to tell the body that we're not safe, that event is still happening. It is only able to tell the mind that the event is over. And so what we call that is basically videotape loops. So it could be happening for 10, 20 years, for how many long that it's been happening for. And what TRTP does is it goes in and it breaks those videotape loops. So it tells the body it's safe, it's over now.
Wow, that's so, wow. You know, you're talking about it and I'm thinking about people talking about quantum physics, and you actually live in different moments of the life, that time is not linear, so you can go back and redo the past the way you wanted it to be. And that's fantastic. That's fun. And it only takes 3 sessions, Catherine.
Yes, generally it's either 3 or 4 sessions, but it is very fast. And what I loved about it is that it's also very safe. Meaning that we've had a lot of really fantastic outcomes through the process. And then going through it as a client myself, I went, I need to learn how to do this.
Wow. that was my next question. How do you decided to become a TRTP practitioner? And what was your story? The story that take you there? Well, obviously, you don't have to tell all the bad parts, but why did you decide to become a practitioner?
Yeah, well, I trained as a counsellor a while ago, and I was working in the mental health sector, and then I was working as a family violence specialist. Unfortunately, I was traumatised on the job by a few different cases, but one particular case in that I developed PTSD and so forth, and anxiety. And I left the sector, and my PTSD was very, very, it was very difficult to manage. And I got to a point where I didn't know where to go to at that point. Talking therapies weren't really working. And sort of at the point where I was like, a bit of a turning point, essentially. I was thinking, I'm going to have to leave the sector. I'm going to have to take drastic measures at this point to work and get well. And through that process and through a contact at work, I had actually found out about TRTP. I said, look, that actually sounds pretty great. And I went through the process, and it was just profound.
Wow.
I got to a point where I think it was for a few years where I was really suffering from the symptoms of PTSD, in that, just say, for example, particularly at nighttime, I'd always check the windows, I would check all the doors were locked and so forth. And it would just be this unconscious thing because I wasn't feeling safe within my body or within myself. Wow. And I was very, very anxious all of the time. My sleep was just not really existent. Body tremors and things like that were happening. And obviously night terrors and things like that, all those symptoms that come along with PTSD. And I found that those just started to go away. So it can be a process where you can find that people, their symptoms just go like that. And some people it might take a little bit of time. So TRTP can be an absolutely amazing starting point. And so once I got to the end of my 3 sessions, I said, I need to learn how to do this. This sounds like it's a
especially in the
modality
sector that you work on. That will be so helpful.
Absolutely.
And and that was my next question. Obviously, we protect your client's privacy, but is there any case that you found that you remember the most, that it was really profound for you, that you could, that you, if you feel comfortable talking about it, obviously? Yeah.
That's fine. And as you said, obviously I'm not going to speak about in too much detail. But there was one particular time I was working with a client who'd experienced a lot of family violence, very extreme family violence. And it had been over a long period of time. And and it's something that we sort of do, we talk about how the client's feeling towards the end of the sessions, and particularly how they're feeling about any perpetrators that we've worked with in that regard. So I remember asking about, how do you feel about this particular perpetrator? And they were like, I don't have any feelings towards that perpetrator now.
Wow.
Like, it was just, I don't think about them. And what that for me was really profound in that, and I really resonated with that, was that when you kind of think about it, and those people that have wronged us in our lives, and I feel like some of that pain or anger or sadness really sits there, and it sits in our bodies, it sits within us. And the fact that you can turn around and say, I'm just quite indifferent towards them, is really powerful. I find that really empowering.
Absolutely.
Myself as a client as well. I remember there was a particular place I couldn't go to, which is when I was working as a practitioner, like within family violence, and there was a place that I just couldn't go, and I'd have quite a strong reaction whenever I went near that particular location. Like I become very nauseous and very shaky and so forth. And I remember maybe a couple of months after completing my first round of sessions, drove past and I was like, oh, okay, what's that place?
Wow.
Cool. So it just really takes that emotional charge out of the event. It works really well for cases with extreme PTSD, but it also works for people who are suffering from anxiety, depression, who've had stressful events in their lives. They don't necessarily need to have experienced really extreme or intense trauma. It's more just looking at patterns and making sure that person feels safe.
And I was going to ask you, Catherine, does it have to be a certain event, or it could be, I'm thinking about, it could be a child, I don't know, he thinks he had some sort of abuse when he was young, but he doesn't really know exactly what age he was or whatever. can TRTP treat that as well, or do you have to have like an exact event? Or
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. So with this particular process, even if the person can't remember exactly what had happened, say for instance, it was an incident that they know they were around about 5 years old, we can't probably treat that exact event as it is, but we can have a look at what was happening around that time, and we can have a look at what other stressful events were happening throughout childhood and so forth. And once we actually, and this is where I like how the process is very holistic. So we look at everything that's been going on, and we look at particular patterns as to what's been happening as well. And so, and look, the brain, as we know, well, we don't know the brain that well, realistically.
yeah.
But clearly either the memory of the event has been repressed by the brain for a particular reason to keep us safe. And we're not all about obviously bringing back memories and so forth. It's more just looking holistically at what's happening for the client.
Wow, that's wow, what a great tool. To be honest, it'll be, imagine if you discover this like when you're young, and then you can live the rest of your life free of that pain. Wow. What
Absolutely.
an
That's
amazing. Yeah, well, I hope this interview gets to everyone that needs to hear it, and people should be doing more TRTP and free themselves from the pain and just keep moving forward with their lives happily, and knowing that they deserve love, and they're able to love as well. So that's fantastic. That's awesome. And you know what? I was going to ask you about something else you do, but I think we are about to run out of time. But I was gonna ask you, do you maybe we don't do the demonstration, but you do something else that I haven't heard before and I found really interesting, which is forest bathing. Do you want to talk about what are the benefits of doing it?
Yeah, so forest bathing, so for centuries, there are so many cultures around the world that have been essentially healing through nature. But the term forest bathing, which is taken from the Japanese term, which is Shinrin-yoku, and that was coined in the 1980s in Japan. And so taking from the works of essentially the father of forest bathing in Japan, Dr. King Lee. And through this process, we're able to really connect with nature, and it's using all of the senses to be able to connect with any kind of green space that's around us. So we're using sight, smell, hearing, and also touch to be able to, and obviously don't recommend taste unless someone really knows what they're picking up in the natural environment. But and using these senses to be able to connect with nature and heal. And through a lot of experimentation, they've been able to discover that people's anxiety levels, stress levels, tend to drop once we've had, it's only a minimum really of 2 hours within a green space for us to be able to experience the benefits, improve sleep. And there's a lot more sort of technical stuff in regards to trees and all the wonderful things that trees do for us. But yeah, so, and that's something that I absolutely love doing, is I run groups, so taking people through and really connecting with nature and meditation in nature and all types of ecotherapy. And I've moved it to a virtual space during Melbourne lockdown.
So are you going to still offer, now that the restrictions are up, are you still going to offer that online option, or?
Oh, absolutely. I feel like the restrictions kind of wind, even though we couldn't, to a program that I offer as a sound medicine hike, because I'm a sound healer as well. But I will definitely still do those in person. But I will now also offer that as a virtual option as well. So, because it means that people can just be at home and it can happen over Zoom. So.
That's fantastic. Well, count me in for maybe not next week, but the week after. I'll be there because I really, it sounds really, really appealing for me. So if you are watching and you're interested in forest bathing, you can do it online, so you can be anywhere in the world. But of course, if you're in Melbourne, contact Catherine. And Catherine, what's the best way to find you?
My website, so daretochangetherapist.com.au. Otherwise, my handle for Facebook and Instagram is pretty much the same, so just Dare to Change Therapies, and that should take you through, and that is where I post all of my events. And you can also reach out with any questions, or if you want to make a booking, you can do so on the website, or again, just reaching out and sending me an email or a text.
Great. Well, it's time for us to go. Unfortunately, it went past very quickly, but thank you so much, Catherine, for your time and your wisdom, and to bring to share what TRTP is, to share this with the world. And thank you, everyone, for watching, and I'll see you in 2 weeks for another interview. Bye. If you like this video, there's 3 things you can do for us. You can give us a like, you can share it with someone that might find this information helpful, and you can also hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any future episodes. Thanks for your time.